It's also a pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to be able to have this opportunity to talk about some of the approaches that we use in naturopathic medicine for Parkinson's disease. So today, the agenda for today, just to go over it very quickly, is we'll talk about what the evidence is like in our field of naturopathic medicine, and then we'll talk about specific treatments as well as prevention options with a focus on exercise and diet, followed by mind and body connection, as well as the microbiome or the gut and Parkinson's connection, the gut-brain health. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about nutritional supplements and herbal supplements as well. And I've organized this in order of priority so that if we end up running a little bit out of time, we have covered the more important things first and have sacrificed some of the less important things for this talk because there is a lot of information to share. So I do apologize if we don't get a chance to go over everything today. The very last part is I wanted to talk about treatments that you can't do at home that you do need to seek out a healthcare provider for. So as you can see, that is also provided as a last kind of priority. So first off, in terms of is there evidence behind naturopathic medicine and complementary and alternative care? What we're looking at here, this is the evidence pyramid that basically creates a hierarchy for the type of research and gives it a grade in terms of quality. So the research that is considered at the bottom of the pyramid, this is the very first, usually the first type of research that is done in a new field. It starts in a test tube, then it graduates to animal research, and maybe somebody tries this once with their patient first. So the problem with this type of research is that it's difficult to translate to clinical practice. For example, for the test tube research, we take cells that are producing dopamine so that they are similar to the types of cells that are damaged in Parkinson's. And we may add some chemicals that cause Parkinson's to simulate the disease. And then include an approach like a treatment, whether it's a drug or a herbal supplement, for example, green tea extract. And we see what happens. Does this green tea extract help protect the cells against the damage from this toxin? If it does, then this type of research then gives us enough evidence that we should say, okay, now let's see what happens in an animal. What happens when we look at an animal model of Parkinson's? Will this green tea still show effect? So you can see that this is far away from randomized clinical trials where you have 100 or 1,000 patients that are all given, half of them are given placebo and half of them are given green tea to see whether this green tea actually helps with the patient who already has Parkinson's disease. So I wanted to highlight this because, unfortunately, in the complementary and alternative medicine, we do struggle getting access to funding in order to do the higher quality research that is ideal for clinical practice. So a lot of the time, the research that I'll be talking about today, it lives in this category. The supplements in particular and the herbal products, they live more in the animal research and test tube category. While diet is mostly in the observational research, and exercise is one of the few things that we actually have good quality randomized control studies for. So I wanted to highlight this because my patients often ask about diet or talk about exercise or some of the supplements, and they've already had this conversation with their neurologist, and the neurologist will say there is no research for this. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not entirely accurate. There is research for these things, but the research is lower on the pyramid. And from a neurologist perspective, because what they work with are drugs and surgeries, these are treatments that have quite a bit of potential for doing damage. So from their perspective, they're not going to be using these treatments if there's only one case report or there's an animal study. They're going to wait until there's enough research, usually until there's enough reviews to make meta-analysis before they start applying this to clinical practice. So from their perspective, there is no research. It's because there's not enough quality research to apply it to clinical practice. In the naturopathic field, we don't have the luxury of having systematic reviews, and often there's not enough data for diet, for example, in randomized controlled trials. So we usually have these conversations still with our patients, but we do talk about the limitations. So that this kind of, I wanted to just to set the stage for the conversation that we're about to start. So based on this, why I start with exercise is because this is the treatment that has the best type of research behind it. It has been well studied, although there's still quite a bit of work that remains to be done. So under exercise, we see studies that look at aerobic training, for example, walking, bicycling, jogging. This may be done with a physiotherapist or alone. Under resistance training, we see more physiotherapy-guided weight training or working with those elastic bands and maybe using some of the gym equipment. Balance training usually implies that there is some type of destabilization that is done. So for example, there are these upside down half spheres where you're standing on a flat platform and you're trying to balance yourself on a moving object. Of course, these types of studies, or rather this type of exercise, is ideally done with a physiotherapist or a trainer who can also guarantee safety. Then we have a very fun category. There's Nordic walking, dance, Tai Chi, and water exercises. So in this category, there is a lot of research showing that if you exercise for 45 to 60 minutes per session, and you have 3 to 4 sessions per week, you will see positive results. What are the positive results depend on the type of exercise that you're doing. So if you're doing aerobic training, usually this means that your gait will improve, that you're able to take bigger steps, that it's easier to make turns and navigate across the room. And that's usually the majority of the benefit. There is, of course, benefit in terms of like exercise is always beneficial for cardiovascular perspective, for cancer prevention. So there's other benefits. But from this 45 to 60 minutes, 3 to 4 times a day, aerobic training can help improve the gait. Resistance training and strength training can help with problems like difficulty getting up out of a chair, a little bit of help with coordination. That's more or less what I've seen in the research, that this is where the resistance training really helps. Balance training, not surprisingly, helps with balance. This also includes Tai Chi. Tai Chi is difficult to learn. So just to kind of give you a heads up, it will take time to learn Tai Chi, but it is a very interesting form of exercise because not only does it help with balance, it actually helps with gait, and it helps with stamina. So even though the movements themselves are not replicating what you usually do when you're walking, something about the types of movements that you're doing still helps in many other ways. And again, in particular with fatigue and stamina, which doesn't seem kind of intuitive because Tai Chi is usually done slowly and it takes kind of some time to do the exercise, so it doesn't really fit into aerobic training either. But with Tai Chi, again, I just want to highlight is to be patient if you are going to start Tai Chi because it is difficult to learn. You're memorizing a lot of steps, but because it's difficult to learn, it is one of the best things to do. Because what we see is that if you're going to use exercise as a treatment, you want it to be novel. You want it to continue to be challenging. So the success lies in keeping you uncomfortable, basically. That once the exercise becomes comfortable and you feel like you're triumphing, you're championing this particular exercise routine, that's actually a heads up that you need to switch. You can celebrate your success, definitely, and celebrate the achievement, but you need to then aim higher or change up the exercise routine. You don't have to keep pushing yourself kind of like let me lift higher weights. That's not so much the point. It's let me learn something new. Let me challenge my body in a way that it hasn't figured out how to navigate, and let me be uncomfortable. So in a way, just wanted to kind of give you also a heads up that you may feel discouraged because as you're doing something that is challenging and it's not working out, you are actually succeeding at reprogramming your brain. This is actually a good place to be in. It feels uncomfortable. It's silly, right? When you're learning a dance and you can see everybody around you is succeeding and you're kind of switching your left and your right and you're going in the wrong direction. This is great. This is actually where you want to be. As frustrating as that is, this is really pushing your brain hard, and this is where you'll get the most benefit out of the exercise. So the other exercises that you can engage with, Nordic walking. Nordic walking, again, is very useful for fatigue, improving energy, which I know is a big challenge for a lot of patients with Parkinson's. And it really helps if you're suffering with shuffling gait. If you're taking very small steps and you notice that your maybe balance is a little bit off, Nordic walking is a good option because it forces you to take an extra long step. And so if you get into the habit of doing Nordic walking, it does seem to improve the shuffling gait, that you may still be shuffling, but you're shuffling and taking a bigger step than you otherwise would have. And because Nordic walking also engages the arms, it helps to increase the arm swing, which further helps with the balance. It helps you to retain proper posture as you walk because it engages the core and it engages the arm swing better. Lastly, water exercises. So water exercises, again, can help with fatigue, can help with mood, but we notice the biggest impact is with rigidity and spasms. So if you notice that in your case, the biggest challenge for you is loosening up the muscles, you feel like you're really stiff, whether kind of in the morning or throughout the day, then adding water exercises can help. Mind you, of course, you need to be mindful of the temperature of the water. So because cold tends to cause muscles to spasm more. So you kind of want to find access to a gym or a pool that has better climate and water access. But things like aquafit, swimming, even just being in water and creating your own routine, this can help. And I think why it works is because it's giving pressure and it's giving very quick feedback to the muscles, because as you're moving against a little bit of resistance which the water is providing. And this is where I think it's allowing the muscle to relax. It's kind of like a very gentle massage while you're exercising. And if you've done massage therapy, you may have noticed that if you're getting a gentle massage, it seems to work a little bit better. At least this is what I hear from patients, is that if they're getting a very deep massage, sometimes that means that they're out of it for the next 3 days. It felt great in the moment, but the next couple of days, their muscles are almost like in revenge mode, and they go back to really being really tight. So in a way, water, I think, provides a more gentle feedback to the muscles, so it's not overpowering and forcing them to relax. It's kind of a gentle, continuous nudge that you're allowed to relax in this environment. The other part of exercise, and again, why like all of my conversations with patients start with exercise, is because of all the different treatments that we'll talk about today and the treatments that are available, whether they're drugs, surgery, or herbal diets, etc., exercise is the closest so far at showing we can have the potential to maybe reverse this condition or maybe slow it down significantly to a different level. And this research is coming from animal research, so just a fair heads up. And with the animal research, this was animals, rats and mice that were put on the treadmill. They were the wheel. They were exercising, I don't know, something like 8 hours a day, quite intense. And they showed that with this type of exercise, you can get the neurons in the brain to start to regenerate and start to rebuild connections. And there's hormones that are released, growth factors in the brain that favor the regeneration of neurons and their connections. From a clinical study, from a human study, this hasn't been replicated to the same extent. And one of the reasons why the researchers believe it hasn't been as effective in humans is that it's difficult to force this type of intensity in for us. It's easy to get the mouse to run for 8 hours a day and not have to do anything else in that day. It's obviously difficult to make this a lifestyle where you're exercising to this type of degree. The other challenge with exercise research is that everybody uses a different type of exercises and then tends to pick a different outcome. So it's been very difficult to have a clear, the best type of exercise is this, and it will offer you motor control, or it will improve progression, or. But again, I emphasize exercise because of those animal studies that at least show a glimpse of hope that exercise, if we find the right one, and if we find the right routine, that maybe it shouldn't be just 3 to 4 times a week. Maybe you should be exercising for 2 hours every day. That if we find the right regimen, there may be a significant benefit that we may be able to slow down progression, or maybe even dare to hope to reverse it. So this kind of completes the exercise conversation part, and the 45 minutes to 60 minutes, 3 to 4 times a day, this is coming from approximately 80 studies that I had reviewed, and these were the studies that were more successful. There were very few studies that had patients exercising more than this, at 5 and 6. I think there was maybe one study that did this. So this is why I kind of share up to 60 minutes, 3 to 4 times a day, but I don't know what the upper limit is. I don't think you're going to be doing harm if you're able to exercise 7 times a week, and you see exercise as essentially this is your prescription for life, as much as breakfast or taking your medications is. So I don't see that this would be a problem. Okay, the next conversation is about diet. And the gold question, the gold standard question is, what is the best diet, and is there such a thing as a Parkinson's diet? What we're looking at here, this is the Mediterranean diet, the Mediterranean pyramid. So we'll talk about each diet, and I'll share kind of the pros and cons, and where the research is and what I've seen clinically. So Mediterranean diet says that you start with this category, with what is foundational for the pyramid, which is fruits, vegetables, olive oil, and grains. So whole wheat, multigrain bread, multigrain pasta, brown rice, the less processed, the more rough beans, lentils. This should be the staple. Then moving up the tier, fish, seafood, this could be done twice a week, while the baseline foods should be done every day, several times per day. As we move up the pyramid, we get to chicken, eggs, and dairy. This could be daily, this could be weekly, less frequent. And the very last is the meat and the sweets. And there's the drinking water is just standard, while wine, if you drink wine, okay, moderation, it's kind of at the top as well. Otherwise, it's not really a recommendation. So if you don't drink wine, you shouldn't start just because of this diet. This diet has been well studied from a cardiovascular and cancer prevention perspective. So the benefits of this diet is that we know it's sustainable. It's definitely not restrictive. It gives you enough flexibility. You can still enjoy every type of food. You're just changing how frequently you're eating this particular food. And from a cardiovascular perspective and cancer prevention, again, these are large studies. There's even randomized controlled trials to show that this diet is effective. From a neurological or a Parkinson's diet, there is a little bit of research to suggest that, again, this is beneficial, but from a Parkinson's perspective, there isn't enough research to show specifically for Parkinson's that, yes, it's going to help. So is it a good diet overall? Definitely, because we see that, again, cardio or cancer prevention, lots of research to say that it's safe and it's beneficial. However, to what extent will it help the Parkinson's symptoms? Not clear. If your diet today looks like an upside down pyramid of this, if you're eating a lot of sweets, a lot of red meat, a lot of dairy, then I suspect that you will probably see a lot of benefit by flipping your diet upside down and instead focusing on the vegetables and the grains and the lentils. But if your diet is already somewhere here, perfecting it and kind of idealizing the fish only twice per week and meat once a month, I don't think you will see that much benefit from it. So that brings us to the next diet, which is the paleo diet. The paleo diet says eat lots of protein, but avoid grains like the plague. This diet comes from kind of the anti-agricultural mindset that we all used to hunt and eat berries and eat whatever was available in the wild, but we didn't go through agricultural practices, so we didn't have access to things like dairy, and we didn't have access to breads and pastas and all this. The benefit of this diet is that it is heavy on protein, and it does recommend eating quite a bit of fruits and vegetables in their raw and unprocessed form. What I see clinically with patients is that if their blood sugar regulation sucks, if they get a lot of their symptoms coming through when they're hungry, when they missed a meal, then paleo diet helps to stabilize that. So for example, if you notice that you get a tremor between lunch and dinner, around 3 or 4 o'clock when you notice that you're hungry, or if you missed lunch and you know, man, this is going to be rough, I'm going to get a lot more tremors, or I'm going to get super fatigued and the medication isn't going to be as effective, I'm going to get the off symptoms coming through, then the paleo diet is a good diet for seeing an improvement in this problem. You'll notice that the medication tends to work longer and that you're not crashing as much. However, because paleo diet is so protein heavy, you do need to be mindful of when do you eat the high amount of protein relative to when you take the levodopa. Protein interferes with levodopa absorption. And so if you're going to take a big chunk of like a chicken breast, that is a substantial amount of protein. This will probably interfere with the levodopa absorption. You'll still absorb the levodopa, but you'll notice that it's not as effective as it usually is. Instead, if you're eating maybe the one egg and having something else like berries or a smoothie for breakfast, one egg is like 9 grams of protein. That should be okay with the levodopa. However, it's not a precise science. And by asking kind of different neurologists what they think, some completely ignore this. Some say you have to take protein within an hour of the levodopa. Some say it's within 2 hours. And there isn't a clear guideline as to say, you know what, 10 grams of protein is fine, but 20, that's when you'll see the interaction. So my recommendation usually is if you are on a stable dose of levodopa, test it out. For the next 2 weeks, see what happens if you eat a lot of protein, whatever you consider as a lot of protein for your diet, and see how does that affect your levodopa. Because it may also be individual. I suspect that there are patients that this probably doesn't apply to, that in their case, the protein and their absorption of levodopa may not actually be a problem, because there is individual variability. The next diet that we'll talk about is the ketogenic diet. And this diet has a lot of pros and cons and a lot of debate around it. So this is the most, I would say, dangerous diet on this list. And here's kind of why and what it is. So ketogenic diet says you can eat an unlimited amount of fats, so lots of fats. Protein, not a problem either, but carbs you have to eliminate to a substantial minimum. And there are different types of ketogenic diets. There are different modifications. At its extreme, I believe it says that you can only have 20 grams of protein from all of your daily intake. And this is very, very harsh and very difficult to do. However, where this comes from is 1920s epileptic research or research on patients with epilepsy with seizures. Before there were enough anti-epileptic medications developed, there was a significant need on how to control the seizures. And the ketogenic diet kind of championed this experience. It improved the seizure frequency and severity. Today, it's reserved more in cases where the medication doesn't work. The patients are resistant to the medication, then ketogenic diet is introduced with the kids usually to see if we can control the seizures. But it doesn't come free. There are side effects from it. There is a risk of getting kidney stones, of developing high cholesterol, and if it's not done correctly, developing all sorts of digestive problems, including diverticulitis. So this is why I kind of keep it in. It does have good research in the case of seizures. In the case of Parkinson's, there is a small study of about 20 patients that showed improved quality of life. with a little bit of improvement in motor symptoms. But because this diet is difficult to do, if you don't do it correctly, you could seriously injure yourself. And everybody who does a ketogenic diet and actually does it properly, like within the right ratios, experiences side effects, which is called the keto flu, where you feel pretty lousy. You feel tired, you get headaches, your mood goes down. For 2 to 4 weeks, you could feel essentially quite poorly. And that's everybody. That's your healthy patients. So with patients who have Parkinson's, if they are going to attempt this diet, I would say assume that your medication almost will stop working and you're going to see some pretty nasty symptoms coming through. So far, I can't say that I've gone here with my patients because we usually go through combinations of paleo, Mediterranean, plant-based, and we kind of stop at the border of getting to ketogenic diet because of this risk associated with it. And because the benefits of it, not entirely sure based on the small studies that it's really worth the risk. The good thing with ketogenic diet is that new research says you don't have to go so extreme as to hit 20 grams of carbohydrates, that if you do a modified ketogenic diet where you just eliminate some of the carbohydrates and you limit it, you will still see benefit. So if we go back for a second to the Mediterranean diet, if you eat unlimited fruits and vegetables, and you start to look at moderation, eliminate some of the bread, some of the pasta, some of the rice, or put it in smaller quantities, then you are moving towards a ketogenic diet without going to the extreme. At its extreme, ketogenic diet causes you to measure out how many blueberries you eat, how much tomatoes you eat. That's a problem because if you're starting to sacrifice fruits and vegetables for a diet, I think we can all agree based on the research that exists, this is a problem. Fruits and vegetables at every diet are kind of like the cornerstone, that this is the thing you need the most. And regardless if you are pro-meat or you're pro-vegan and paleo, everybody is on the same page that fruits and vegetables are important. So that's where ketogenic diet, I would say, is ideal if you're not limiting the fruits and vegetables, you're just reducing the other carbohydrates from your breads, your cereals, your rice, and etc. So then we're moving down to plant-based diet and Wahls protocol. Wahls protocol, you may have heard of it. It's a cross between paleo and ketogenic. So again, the benefits and the risks are about the same. Plant-based diet says that our problems are coming from eating the meat, the chicken, the dairy. These have been adulterated with different chemicals and pesticides, and they are harder to digest on the body, or they're not necessary. I would say that a lot of patients do feel well on the on the plant-based diet, but not everybody. And so the key takeaway that I would recommend is you can try different diets. Expect to see results within 2 or 4 weeks of making substantial diet change if you are consistent with it. But do try it on yourself because we are all individuals. We are like different. And from a Parkinson's perspective, there isn't enough research to say that one diet is the best and that it trumps everything else. So it makes sense to try it out and play with different ingredients and see how do you feel. You can try one diet at a time, or you can take these takeaway messages and start here. Reduce the sugar, alcohol, and processed foods. Every diet is in agreement with this step. Add more fruits and vegetables. I highlight blueberries because they're one of the few things that have actually been studied in trials, and they show that blueberries are really beneficial for Parkinson's. They improve, again, energy, and from preclinical research, they protect those neurons the most. So blueberries make them a daily treatment. And the next thing is, again, that we can all agree on is increasing plant protein and plant-based fats. Whether you're into vegan, vegetarian, or paleo, all of these diets agree that protein is important. The disagreement is, can you get it from meat or not? So if you're just introducing plant-based protein, again, you're not going to be harming yourself. If you introduce a variety, if your focus is on introducing the diverse range of different types of protein and, again, fats. Coffee, I'll just mention, has been in the bad books for a long time, depending on which practitioner and which form of medicine you follow. From a Parkinson's perspective, the research is pretty clear that it's beneficial. However, if you do get side effects from it, you notice that your tremors are worse, or you're jittery, you get heart palpitation, it's just not worth it. But if you can tolerate it, you don't have to kick out the coffee from your routine. Okay, sorry, I'm cognizant of time. As I mentioned, there's a lot to talk about, so I'll move on towards mind and body connection. So if you are, or if you're a caregiver and the person that you're taking care of is showing signs of anxiety and depression, this may or may not be related to their Parkinson's diagnosis. We know now that the anxiety and depression can actually start long before the motor symptoms of Parkinson's and long before it's diagnosed. So the person may be suffering from this prior, and it may be caused by the Parkinson's, and vice versa. Sometimes the anxiety and depression develop after the diagnosis. It may be in response to getting this diagnosis dropped on you, or it may come much later, 5 and 10 years later. And the challenge is to be able to differentiate, is this a Parkinson's related anxiety and depression, or is it just anxiety and depression in general? Because these are also very common. So seeking help for this is important, and sharing this information with your neurologist when it comes time to reviewing your medication. If you notice that mood has started to dip, or you're starting to feel more anxious, this can be related to the Parkinson's, so there may be additional changes to the medication that your neurologist may be able to suggest. From a mind-body perspective, in terms of meditation and guided imagery, there isn't as much clear research to say to what extent meditation and guided imagery can help, but there is a lot of theoretical behind it. So meditation on its own does help to reduce the sympathetic stress response of the body and bring the person into a relaxed state, the parasympathetic, where under parasympathetic stimulation, the body optimizes its function. The heart relaxes, the muscles can relax, the digestive tract can work properly, the immune system is supported better. So the parasympathetic state is the better state for healing. Sympathetic helps us run away from stress, deal with the line that we need to run away from, deal with work, but it's not supposed to keep us in a permanent state. Sympathetic only works well when it's done acutely, and then the body needs to return back to status quo, which is parasympathetic. So meditation can do that. Whether it's through you're listening to an app on your phone, you're listening to music, it could be a walking meditation, whatever helps you to slow down your heart rate and get to a place of calm, you can consider this a meditative practice. Meditation could also mean taking meditation classes, studying Vipassana, doing yoga, etc. It's kind of up to you to find out what you resonate with. But I would say that if you don't like the idea of meditation and you're kind of like, I hate sitting still and my mind wanders, this isn't for me, don't give up on it just yet. Because if you switch to guided imagery and guided meditation, it actually helps a lot for patients who find it difficult to sit still and to focus, because it provides you with a script. There's a lot of access to this stuff on YouTube. You can purchase audio recordings. Again, there's a lot of different apps on the phone that you can download where you're getting a script told to you. And sometimes you have to play around and find the one that you actually like. Sometimes you'll hate the sound of the person's voice, and obviously that's really annoying. So you kind of have to find the right script and the right sound quality. And then if you follow the guide as they're telling you to deep breathe, relax, let your mind wander to a particular thing, it's okay for you to disengage and to come back periodically. But this alone can help to restore your body into that parasympathetic mode that is calmer. So one benefit is to get to this place of calm, which is restorative. The other benefit is slightly different. And this comes from elite athletes and dancers who use visualization training as a way to achieve better results in their career and their performance. Where the recommendation is, if you're waiting around on the subway, on the bus, then visualize the dance routine, or visualize exactly how you swing that golf swing, or the hockey puck, or whatever, or how you're running and jumping over a particular height. And this has been measured that when you're visualizing this, you are activating your brain, which is activating different components of the nervous system and training the programs, so that when you do actually do the physical movement and you start running and you jump, you are jumping better because of this visualization. And the same thing for dancers, that it's easier for them to then perform the routine, to go through it, and to make less mistakes if they've gone through a visualization, a mental rehearsal of what they're going to do. So from a Parkinson's perspective, whether it is getting up out of the chair, running, doing a particular exercise, doing balance training, visualizing what success looks like and how you would have to engage your body in order to not take an extra step to the left if you're out of balance. How would you have to engage your core to balance yourself? If you feel that you're being kind of pushed forward and you're losing balance and you need to, again, take those multiple steps forward, what muscle would you have to engage in order to not go forward? So you would have to engage your lower back, kind of tighten your shoulders, lean backwards a little bit to balance this out. So there is a lot of benefit to this visualization, and you can do this anywhere, anytime, right? And build this into your practice. This guided imagery works well with the idea of neuroplasticity, where if you are actively doing exercise, whether it's physical or mental exercise, you can retrain your brain to find a new way to achieve the same performance, to achieve the same movement or behavior. The example that I use is a bicycle example. You may have seen YouTube videos where a patient struggles to walk. It's difficult, the balance is off, but once they get up on the bicycle, wow, they're doing an amazing job, they're balanced, they can bike for hours, and they look really stable. And one of the reasons why we think this happens is because being on a bicycle engages different parts of the brain that haven't been affected by the Parkinson's. And so it's not that this is a cure, it's that the brain has a different circuitry altogether for some of the different types of movements that we engage in. And so if you can engage with those, you can find a way to circumvent the fact that the Parkinson's is affecting portion of the brain. Okay, we're trying to recover it, but at the same time, let's have a backup plan where we are using other parts of the brain to solve the same problem. That's essentially the idea, or part of the idea of neuroplasticity. So the next very important conversation is around microbiome and Parkinson's. And this is the idea that the digestive tract differs significantly in patients who have Parkinson's from the patients who are healthy. And differs in the type of bacteria that colonize the gut. We know that Parkinson's can present with digestive disorders, not all the time. Not everybody is affected. Some patients have constipation, some have digestive disturbance, some pain, some diarrhea. But again, not everybody. But the ones that do, when we sample their stool, we can see that the profile of the bacteria that they have is different, like really different from that of the healthy. And we know now from studies on IBS, on depression, that when the gut changes, it changes how the brain functions as well, and vice versa. The function of the brain can also affect how the gut functions, and then changes who colonizes this gut. So a recent, maybe not so recent now, 2016 study did a really interesting experiment that linked the gut to Parkinson's disease progression or etiology, the start of it. So what they did was they genetically engineered mice to accumulate a protein, alpha-synuclein, that is known to accumulate in Parkinson's. So they gave them a predisposition, a vulnerability, so that they were more likely to develop Parkinson's. And then they took the stool sample from patients who already have Parkinson's, compared to patients who don't, and did a fecal transplant and gave this to the mice. And what they noticed was that the mice started to develop Parkinson's, that the behavior, their motor abnormalities matched that of Parkinson's. When they looked further at their gut, they saw that this alpha-synuclein began to misform and accumulate in the gut, And then over the next few days and hours, it started to accumulate in the brain, simulating what we see with Parkinson's. We need to kind of put this in context in that this was done again with mice that have a genetic vulnerability, which is not that common for us, for humans, that there isn't as, you don't have as many genetic causes for Parkinson's. We can't completely take this and run with it, but this does show that what's happening in the gut may have a very important effect on the brain. To what extent does this actually happen clinically? We're not sure. But excuse me, as we see more and more research coming from fecal transplants, it looks like there is something to this, taking a healthy stool sample and implanting it into a patient who has a neurological problem. And in some case reports, we do see an improvement. This may be because there is a connection between the gut and the microglia. These are the cells that can cause damage in the brain. We're not sure exactly what the connection is, but the connection is there. So when we're talking about this from kind of a clinical side, I think this highlights the importance of having a healthy diet to favor the growth of the healthy bacteria, and maybe opens up the conversation about probiotics. I wouldn't recommend necessarily running from this webinar and purchasing probiotics because there's a lot of them on the market and they're not studied well enough to say that like all of them are great. But it is worth having a conversation either with your naturopathic doctor, your family doctor, your neurologist, but at least starting the conversation of, do you think this will help? And is there anything that you've seen in your experience, a particular probiotic that has? Again, there's a ton of probiotics in the market, and some of them do cause problems, digestive disturbances. Okay, so we are down to the wire. So in terms of nutritional herbal supplements, is there anything that I can recommend to everybody? No. The reason for that is that Parkinson's presents quite differently in everyone, and not everything is safe for everyone. There's a lot of supplements and herbs that interact with medications, so I wouldn't recommend just going with any particular supplement for everybody. Is there anything that you don't need supervision on? Maybe B vitamins and maybe vitamin D. And I say maybe because these are things that usually vitamin D is recommended to everybody. And there is important research to show that if your vitamin D is low, it is correlated with more progression and more severe presentation of Parkinson's. And there is a clinical trial that showed if you increase vitamin D, if you start supplementing with it, you can cause a delay in progression. So if there is anything that is generally safe, the regular dose of 1,000 IUs of vitamin D is what's usually recommended to the entire Canadian population, regardless of condition. So maybe this is the one thing that I would say you can jump in. But otherwise, everything else, and there is a lot of everything else, does require double checking. How does this interact with levodopa, and how does it interact with maybe other medications that you may be on? And because there is a lot to choose from, and this is the category of medicine that doesn't have great evidence, I would say this warrants a lot of conversation and saying, why are we doing this and what do we expect to get out of it? Because you can spend a lot of time, money, and effort into this without necessarily seeing the results that you want. Because some of this works for patients who have rigidity, other things work better for patients who have cognitive problems because of Parkinson's, and other things on this list really work better with tremor, but they don't help with the spasms. So there is quite a bit of variability. Okay, in-office procedures, what can you do with a healthcare provider that you can't do at home? You can do counseling, because I do see with my patients that mental health, anxiety, and depression are very frequently intertwined with this condition. So seeking counseling, ideally with a social worker or a counselor, is great. Discussing natural health products. And there is a category of things like acupuncture, laser, intravenous therapies that you can only do in office. Of them, I would say that acupuncture and laser therapy has the better outcomes, at least from what I've seen. Acupuncture can help with tremor and pain management. There is a little bit of potential to improve mobility. So these are the things that I would focus on. And laser is something that's fairly new. So today, not a lot of people have access to a laser machine. Maybe in the next 5 years, this form of medicine will increase. I would recommend just keeping an eye on it. If your physiotherapist has access to a laser, talk to them about using it for either pain management or combining it with acupuncture points. Again, if they're open to it, this may help. Okay. So I can see we're moving on towards questions. Thank you for the heads up. And maybe as you're thinking of the question, I'll just add one little piece, is that when you're looking for a healthcare provider or you're planning to try out a therapy, is ask about the outcomes. Get whoever you're working with to be very specific about what you're getting out of this treatment, because there is a lot of conversation around, yes, we can reverse this condition or we can cure it. I've heard of these stories, and that's misleading and it's not fair. And it's good to quantify from the get-go to get the practitioner to say exactly what are the outcomes and when will you see them, so that you can have a clear timeline. And it doesn't mean that you should give up if you're not getting those outcomes, but at least you know that at this point we should check in and change the treatment if it hasn't been working. I've seen people on 2 years on the same protocol, and the conversation is you're almost there and you're almost going to see an improvement. I don't think that's a fair conversation. The other thing, though, that I also wanted to highlight is there are a lot of interesting marketing therapies that are on the market. Double check if they're actually regulated. I have a lot of beef with the doTERRA essential oils because they advertise that they are safe and they're Health Canada approved, which is partially true. They're approved for topical use. They are not approved for oral use. And that's not a fair way to spin the story, because a lot of patients are under the impression that they're safe to take orally and they're safe to cook with and they're safe to eat. And if you actually go through Health Canada website, you'll notice that what they approved the doTERRA for was very specifically to use it topically on the skin. There was no conversation around oral. Okay, so now I'm officially done. Thank you for your patience. And I'm